Hello students, we once again come together to continue our study of modern Indian architecture, and we will now go to part 5 of the first generation, that is the period from 1945 to 1970. So, we had already seen last time the important example of the comparative study of three Gandhi Smaraks, one made by Habib Rahman in Barakpur, the other in Delhi by Vanu Bhuta, and the third was the Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya by Charles Corey in Ahmedabad. All three reflected the minimalism, that is the Western modernist ideology, but it was so similar to the frugal lifestyle of Gandhiji and also the lifestyle that he followed. Whereas there was also the addition of Indian interpretations of modernism in these examples, with, for example, the appearance of the temple form in Barakpur and the appearance of the village concept in the Gandhi Smarak Sangrahalaya. So, modernism was supplemented by Indian architectural or traditional Indian architectural language, and this was one of the early steps that these architects were taking to amalgamate these traditional Indian elements into modernist buildings in such a manner that they do not seem delinked from each other. We have seen this earlier in the approach of CPWD, but there, as I showed you through the examples, that the modernist building was the traditional elements were added on to them, but it was very clearly evident that they were added but not amalgamated. They were not fused together to make one new building, as seems to be happening in these buildings here. We also saw last time that there was the the arrival of major architectural firms of that period, one which continues even till today, that is the HCP Design and Project Management. It was earlier Hasmukh Patel was the lead architect, now architect Bimal Patel is the lead architect, and this was the work done by Hasmukh Patel, and this is the extension of the IIM Ahmedabad campus done by Bimal Patel. Then there were the works of Stein, Doshi and Bhalla, and so we have the works of Mr. Doshi. This is the NIFT campus in Delhi, and this is the India Habitat Center by Joseph Allen Stein. Then the works of Kanvinde Rai and Chaudhary, the earlier work of IIT Kanpur by architect Kanvinde, and then the Nehru Science Center in Delhi. So, this was the arrival of these important firms. The first modernist generation of international architects to practice in India, these architects were very enthusiastic towards their response to produce a modernist architecture for India, and they were drawn primarily from their British and American experience and not so much from the European experience, as is reflected in the works that were seen in the early years. But the most prominent Indian architects of the 1950s and 60s were less influenced by the British and American tradition and more impacted by the rationalist ideology that was coming from Europe. Now, this is the first generation of international architects. This was also followed by the most important contribution of an international architect in India, and that was that of Corbusier, and along with him his team, that is his cousin Jean-Pierre Jeanneret, Maxwell Fry and Jane Drew. And parallelly or a little later than that was the American impact through Louis Kahn, which was also very strongly modernist in the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Now, this modernist generation of international architects, or rather let us go back even to pre-independence and then moving to post-independence, we had seen the contribution of Walter Sykes George and Claude Batley, and their work continued till death post-independence. Then there was Otto Königsberger, we have seen his contribution also in the design of Bhubaneswar. There was John Ritchie, who was an Australian in Mumbai, who designed RBI Kolkata. Hollabert and Root, who were two architect team from Chicago School, who designed the Tata Center in Kolkata. Then Vilgus and Chase from Washington, who designed the US Consulate Staff Quarters in Kolkata, and Edward Durrell Stone, who designed the US Embassy in New Delhi in 1958. This was one amongst the many notable embassies that are part of Chanakyapuri in Delhi today. These are the various examples, and Chanakyapuri is a hub of modern architecture representing these different countries. So, for example, we have the Swiss embassy, which is typically modernist and very neat and tidy in its appearance. Then there is the traditional architecture that you see in Thai embassy. We again see modernism in the Polish embassy. This is the British consulate or the British High Commission. Then we have the Middle Eastern architecture being reflected in the Saudi embassy, and again modernism in the Norwegian embassy. Then coming to the skyscraper design, one was the use or rather the adoption of the wedding cake or the setback skyscraper in the RBI Kolkata building by John A. Ritchie. This is an example of the setback skyscraper or the wedding cake skyscraper in New York. Now this kind of skyscraper had originated because of the zoning resolutions of New York of 1916. Just before this in New York, just to give you an idea of why this shape came up, was that in New York a building had come up in around the 1910s, around that time, called the Equitable Building, which had a very massive straight up block, completely going straight up, and because of that there was a very large shadow cast on the nearby buildings of that Equitable Building, and the street level was completely dark, there was no sun penetration, and this created a kind of an anti-reaction amongst the New Yorkers that these kind of buildings, as they continue to arise in New York, we will not be having any sunlight at the street level, and lot of buildings which are connected around, which are surrounding that building, will be cut off from sun completely. And as a result of that, this resolution was adopted in 1916 that the skyscraper needs to be set back as it rises up. And they were, we do not right now have time to go into that, the details of the angles that were provided so that at the street level sun would be able to penetrate and the nearby buildings would not be completely overshadowed or completely, the sun would be completely cut off from them. And this RBI Kolkata building was, it was a reflection of the wedding cake skyscraper. Moving on to the idea of the modernist skyscraper. For example, the Liver House in the early 1950s in New York by Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. This skyscraper was then adopted by Holabird and Root for the Tata Center in Kolkata. It's a very similar cuboidal skyscraper. As you can see, there is a complete base under the Liver House occupying the entire site for about 2 or 3 stories. This is that base, and we see a similar base in the Tata Center. And later on, when we look at the study of point blocks, I will again come back and refer to this kind of configuration of point blocks. But here we see that this was a sleek glass building, the Liver House, and this block of Tata Center is very similar to this. The only difference is it has been modified to Indian climate. So it has got these vertical fins or louvers here and on the in this facade, so that direct sun does not impinge on the facade. So the modification happened in a modernist skyscraper, a modernist glass and steel skyscraper, to adopt it to the Indian conditions. Also, this is not in steel but in RCC frame. Now coming to the building by the US Embassy by Edward Durrell Stone, it was a modernist building in a kind of a classical geometry. So if you compare or rather if you take the example of the classical geometry, we find that in the Greek temple, and if you compare this geometry with that of the Alte Museum by Carl Friedrich Schinkel at the turn of the 20th century, or rather you can say the end 19th century, or you compare it with the mid 20th century New National Gallery in Berlin by Mies van der Rohe, and then you have Edward Durrell Stone's US Embassy in Delhi. All 4 of them are following the Greek classical temple facade geometry. And only thing is that in case of New National this Alte Museum is, it's a very direct reflection of the classical temple facade, whereas New National Gallery is an interpretation in steel, and Mies did that. Whereas in the US Embassy we find a similar concept of these symmetrically placed columns, but there is a projection over the entire building to completely shade the facade from the hot sun of Delhi. So this embassy was a white rectangular composition akin to the modernist white rectangular geometry, but it had these slender gilded columns. They were golden gilded columns, and they were in this classical quality, but not the classical feature. The column itself was not having the dimension of a classical column. This in a sense was similar to the approach of the New National Gallery Museum by New National Gallery by Mies van der Rohe, where the column is in steel ice section, so it is a slender column, but the facade is a reflection of the classical facade. The other was that the elements that related to the Indian context. So what you have here is, you have the internal courtyard, you have the jali work. So all of these elements are not only as a part of the climatic response of the building, that jali work and the projected roof over the building to prevent direct sun impacting on the facade, and you have internal courtyards to with water and greenery to cool down the building on the inside. Very typical North Indian concept of internal courtyard planning, but this arrangement was also there for aesthetic purposes. The overall appearance of the building wedded modernist architecture with Indian aesthetic. So it was a climatic response and an aesthetic response, and thus the building, though modernist, was an Indian modern building, and this was a solution given by an American architect. Now looking at one of the most important schools that came up around the mid 20th century, we had seen earlier that Sir J.J. School of Art had come up pre-independence, and that was the school producing the most of the architects of that time. And then there was the arrival of CEPT along with CCA in Chandigarh, when Chandigarh was developed, and we look at that when we study the impact of Corbusier or the impact of Western architects in India. And then around the time or little later was SPA Delhi. So Bernard Kahn was an American educated Frenchman who joined Doshi to co-direct CEPT Ahmedabad, and the inputs were also taken from Harry Wees, who was an American architect, to develop the educational program of CEPT, which is a very important architectural program developed in India for architectural education in India. Christopher Benninger came to India in 1968 and became the first head of department of CEPT in 1972. He was one building that we will see subsequently in this presentation today is the Orleans Francais Library that was designed by him in Ahmedabad in 1973, and he continued as an educator in the Center for Development Studies and Activities in Pune. Now we have seen, just before this I showed you the list of international architects who worked in India post independence with more aligned to the modernist ideology. But there were also Western architects who came to India and then settled in India and spent a lifetime in India. So we have Christopher Benninger, we have Joseph Allen Stein, and then we have Laurie Baker, who finally became an Indian citizen. Christopher Benninger was an American, and he is now can be considered as an Indian architect and planner. He was born in Ohio, America, educated in urban planning in MIT and architecture in Harvard, and he came to India, well, I would say since 1968, because he had already come to India in 68 and become the director of CEPT by 72. and his firm is Christopher Charles Benninger Architects. So examples are the Orléans-Français Library and the other buildings that have been done by him. His designing is continued into the 21st century. We have the Mahindra College, World College of India in Pune in 1998. We have the Samudra Institute of Marine Studies in Pune in 2007. We have the Girls Hostel of Koip in Pune in 2012. We have Suzlon in 2009 again in Pune, and India House in Pune. Now it would seem as if most of his works of course are in Pune, but there are works spread even in Bhutan and other so neighboring country and in other parts of India. So when we will look at iconic works, we will again refer back to the works of Christopher. We will again look at the works of Christopher Benninger in more detail. Laurie Baker was from 1917 to 2007, and works were predominantly in Kerala and heavily entwined with the vernacular architecture and with local materials and local construction technologies, use of local labor. And when we go on to study the iconic works by architects in India, we will again look at the works of Laurie Baker. For example, there is the India Coffee House in Trivandrum, there is Center for Development Studies in Ullur, and then there is the Nirmiti houses in Kerala in 1987. Then the third is Joseph Allen Stein from 1912 to 2001, both an educator and a practicing architect. In 1952 he came to India as the head of the Department of Architecture of Bengal School of Engineering in 1952. Within 3 years he had established a practice in Delhi with Benjamin Polk, and later on he teamed up with Doshi and Bhalla to form Stein, Doshi and Bhalla. This is the example of the Triveni Kala Sangam in New Delhi in 1963, and this here itself you find one adoption of the Jali work here in a modern form by Stein to have a climatic response to the Indian climatic conditions. Very, very important principle he continued to adopt to make his buildings climatically responsive in Indian conditions. So coming to the Orléans-Français Library in Ahmedabad by Christopher Benninger, this library essentially has 9 modules of 4.75 by 4.75 square, and this ordered floor plan is into a system of interlocked and double height spaces. As you see here, these are double height spaces if you see this in this model, and here also, and this rear wall, this back wall that you see here in the model, this back wall is completely glazed, and there are these modular toilets as you see in this photograph that are projecting out of the back wall. So the floor plan per se is completely free for the various functions of the building without being intruded upon by the services like toilets. Now this concept is coming from the concept of servant and served spaces by Louis Kahn, and he had brought forth this concept in the Richards Medical Research Labs in the University of Pennsylvania in 1960. And how does it work? That these facilities that you see here, these projections that are visible also in the picture, they are having the staircases, the exhaust shafts. So the services are provided in these modules which are attached to the building. So according to what Kahn's idea was, that these are the served spaces and these are the servant spaces, the services. So they should be on the periphery and they should be on the outside of the building, so that the floor space can be completely free for the function of the building. Similarly, Christopher Benninger, according to my viewpoint, did the similar thing. This floor plan is completely free for the various activities, whereas the toilets are the servant spaces attached to the building. Later on in high-tech architecture, a similar idea would also be followed by Richard Rogers, Renzo Piano and Norman Foster in buildings like Lloyd's of London and in HSBC Hong Kong. And then this is exposed in RCC brickwork both inside and outside the building. By this time, when we start putting the entire jigsaw puzzle together, you will come to know that from 1952 onwards, Chandigarh had already begun, and in the housing part of Chandigarh, the houses were being built in stucco and exposed brickwork. And also some of the works that that Corbusier did in Ahmedabad were in exposed brick and RCC. So this was a concept that Corbusier had already brought into India. And if you refer back to my earlier lecture, I had told you that Shoesmith and Walter Sykes George were the first ones to bring this idea into India through their works in exposed brick and concrete, and this had become a dominant trend in the architecture of Delhi. So we find the same thing here in Ahmedabad. There is also a exposed concrete column in the center center of the main space. Now the exposed brick walls also reflect the language of the existing college. There is an old college on this to which this library building is a part of that bigger older campus, and so it is linking the old with the new. So the idea being that a new building can be linked to an older building by the way in which we show the the materials on the outside, that by providing a similar material palette on the outside, we can link two different architectural concepts together. On one hand, we have a modernist building, which is the Alliance Francaise Library, and then we have an older building, and just by keeping the material palette similar, we are bringing them to connect with each other. There are other ideas of connecting old buildings with new buildings, and if we get an opportunity, we will look at those ideas later. Now this has brick walls which are 36 centimeters thick, facing on the east, south and west to block the hot sun, and the passive cooling is also aided through greenery. So the entire building has been designed to give a favorable climatic response. There is natural lighting that is coming from north facing skylights. I will take you back again to show you this. These are the north facing skylights from where the light is filtering into the building, and the main door is a pivoting square door, and it is completely glazed. That also brings in light, and as you can see, glare does not come in because of the projection over the main door. Now what was happening globally around the same time, 1940 to 1960, there was buildings like the Crown Hall in IIT Illinois by Mies, there was the Glass House by Philip Johnson, there were the works of architects like Pierre Luigi Nervi, there was Mies van der Rohe Seagram building, and the Guggenheim Museum by Frank Lloyd Wright in New York. So the first generation of Indian architects associated with modernist architecture, if we talk about them, there was a tremendous euphoria post independence, and it was Bauhaus rationalism that really captured the heart of many young Indian architects. Also because architects like Habib Rahman, A.P. Kanwinde and directly come under the influence of Walter Gropius in America, and even architects like Charles Correa had learned these modernist concepts in, for example, the University of Michigan where he studied. But more ideas were soon added to the Bauhaus paradigm or the Bauhaus palette, and these ideas were both homegrown and imported. For example, one of the most important ideas was that or the external influence was that of the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, and the impact of Frank Lloyd Wright, the organic architectural approach of Frank Lloyd Wright He said a house should be off the hill and not on the hill. That means the building should completely merge with its surrounding landscape. The way he would make spaces to flow into each other, the whole idea of the free plan really started, came in first in the works of Frank Lloyd Wright and then graduated in the work of younger European architects. And so these architects who had trained in this licensed school of Frank Lloyd Wright, like Gira Sarabhai, Nari Gandhi, they brought that influence into India. Stein did not study under Frank Lloyd Wright, but Stein was influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright, because there was a major part, several years, that Stein had worked in United States and designed buildings, executed buildings in United States. Now, if we were to see the actual building of Frank Lloyd Wright, none were executed in India. One building he did design, the Calico Mills Administration Building proposal in Ahmedabad, but it was never built. But if you can just look at this building, you immediately reminded of the design features of Wright's work in the final, let us say 15 to 20 years of his life. We see that happening in the Price Tower. We see those modernist international style ideas along with this organic approach in the falling water. We see the idea of horizontal floating planes in the Roby House around 1908, I believe, and we see a similar idea of vertical and horizontal planes in the work of Calico Mills building. So this is a kind of the same idea that we find in other works of Wright also being seen in Calico. Now we see the same ideas of organic architecture, free flowing spaces, the way materials are used and forms are used in the works of Nari Gandhi. We see the way spaces are put together in the works of Gira Sarabhai in one house that she designed in Ahmedabad, and also in the NID building that she had done in NID, the National Institute of Design building. This is the one. And if you look at the similarity between this house she designed, so this is the spaces, the way the flow of spaces is taking place, and this is the terrace of falling water. So if you look at this house and the way the view is through and through from one end to the other through the glass, and we find a similar thing in the falling water, and the way the planes are organized in NID. Now Stein, example of growing modern architecture in India with a group of institutional buildings that he designed in adjoining to the Lodi Gardens of New Delhi. In fact, this group of buildings resulted in this area being called Steinabad, because there are several buildings done by him. There is the Ford Foundation, the UNICEF building, the IIC and the IHC in 1993. All of them in a very limited radius around the Lodi Gardens or in the Lodi estate area. Other projects that he did, for example, are the Kashmir Conference Center in 1983, this is the one, and there was a continued consistency in his line of thought about architecture. Now if we were to see F.L. Wright and beyond in India, though Stein had little direct contact with FLW in his works of the 1950s like the IIC and his early 1960s work of the American International School in 1962 to 68, or approximately this is the same time parallelly these two projects have been done. There is an organic aesthetic character to these buildings. There is an alliance with nature without and at the same time shunning or doing away with the formal orthogonal geometries of modernist architecture. They are there, we will see that in IIC, but he breaks that orthogonal geometry, and there is the and he also does away with the abstract formal compositions of rationalists. His buildings are more down to earth, they are more, they are more in tune with the climatic realities of India, they are more serene in the way the spaces have been created, and we will look at that. That does not in any way negate the ideas of modernist architecture, the rationalist ideology of modernist architecture, that just puts it in a perspective with regard to Indian conditions. So, we will try to look at those examples again and again. We have already seen the example of Gandhi Samarak Sangralaya, where modernist architecture has been brought down, the minimalism of modernist architecture has been wedded with Indian architectural ideas. So, I will stop here with this, and in the next presentation I will start with the works of Stein, particularly the India International Center.